Maggie and David had just moved into their dream home, an old house on the edge of the town. But things quickly became unsettling. Strange noises echoed through the walls at night, and objects moved on their own. At first, they tried to dismiss it, but the odd occurrences only grew worse. David, ever the skeptic, blamed the house's age, but Maggie felt something deeper was wrong. Desperate for answers, Maggie called a local psychic named Elizabeth, hoping she could help. Elizabeth agreed to come the next day. She arrived wearing a flowing black dress, her dark hair and intense green eyes giving her an air of mystery. After a brief greeting, she began walking around the house, lightly touching the walls. She stopped in front of the stairs and murmured, "The energy here is unusual." David, doubtful, asked what she meant. Elizabeth hesitated before explaining that the house had a dark history, filled with tragedy and loss. "There's a presence here," she said softly. "It's not malevolent, but it's lingering." Maggie, though nervous, was desperate for answers. She told Elizabeth about the strange events they'd experienced, and the psychic listened carefully, nodding. She then suggested a reading to better understand the house's energy. Sitting on the floor, Elizabeth set out a circle of tarot cards and began to shuffle them. She instructed Maggie and David to focus on the house and the strange happenings. After a few moments, Elizabeth began to lay out the cards. As she did, her face grew serious, and she muttered under her breath. The first card she turned was the Death card. Elizabeth's hands trembled slightly, her face paling. "This house, it holds secrets," she said, "and there's a connection to someone who died here." Maggie felt a chill run down her spine. "Who?" she asked, her voice shaky. Elizabeth paused, then turned over another card, the Tower, a symbol of destruction and upheaval. The air in the room grew colder. "Something is trying to reach out to you, Maggie. The house is reacting to you, but I don't know why." David, uncomfortable, asked, "What does that mean?" Elizabeth looked at Maggie, her expression grave. "The house is trying to show you something. There's a connection between you and it, something from your past." Maggie's heart raced. She couldn't understand what Elizabeth meant, but the atmosphere in the room felt thick with tension. She wanted answers, but the more she heard, the more she felt the weight of the house's secrets pressing in on her. Elizabeth stood up, her voice now cold and firm. "I think the house is trying to tell you the truth, but it's something you may not be ready to hear." Maggie sat frozen, staring at Elizabeth, her heart pounding in her chest. The room seemed colder now, and the silence between them felt suffocating. David, sensing her growing unease, stood up and walked toward the window, his arms crossed tightly. "Elizabeth," Maggie said, her voice trembling, "what truth are you talking about?" The psychic's eyes flickered for a moment. Then she took a slow breath. "There's something more to this house, something you don't remember, something you've been running from." Maggie's stomach twisted with fear. "What are you saying?" she whispered. "I've never lived here before. This is the first time I've set foot in this house." Elizabeth nodded, but her expression remained serious. "I believe the house is tied to something in your past, Maggie. Something dark, something you've forgotten. You're not here by chance." David scoffed, turning away from the window. "This is crazy. You're just playing on our fears to make us believe in something that isn't there." But Maggie couldn't shake the feeling that Elizabeth was telling the truth. The psychic had been eerily accurate with her readings. The cards, the way she spoke. There was a sense of knowing, a connection between Elizabeth and the house that couldn't be ignored. Elizabeth continued, "I can't tell you everything just yet, but I think you need to remember. This house has a history, and so do you." Maggie's mind raced, trying to recall anything that could explain what Elizabeth was suggesting. She had no memory of this house before. Her past had been simple, ordinary, until now. Yet, something in her gut told her Elizabeth wasn't lying. "We need to get to the bottom of this," Elizabeth said, snapping Maggie back to the present. "I'll do a more detailed reading. It might be the only way." Maggie agreed, her nerves frayed, but desperate for answers. They moved into the living room, where Elizabeth arranged the tarot cards again. This time, she placed a large crystal in the center of the spread, a tool for deeper meditation, she explained. "This will help us focus," Elizabeth said, her voice quiet. "Clear your mind and let the house's energy speak to you." Maggie closed her eyes, trying to push away the fear clawing at her chest. She focused on the house, on the cold air, on the strange presence that seemed to linger just beyond her reach. The images came to her in flashes: a young girl standing by the window, a shadow moving through the hall, a faint whisper calling her name. It felt like a dream, distant and blurry, but still vivid. When she opened her eyes, Elizabeth was watching her intently. "You saw something," the psychic whispered. "Tell me." Maggie hesitated. "I don't know. It was like a memory, but not mine. A girl, standing by the window, and then something darker, something following her." Elizabeth's face paled. "It's not just a memory. That girl, she's tied to this house, and her presence is still here, reaching out to you." David frowned. "This is insane. You're telling me Maggie's supposed to be some sort of part of this?" Elizabeth turned to him, her voice sharp. "This isn't a game, David. There's something powerful in this house, something you don't understand." Maggie's head swirled. "What do you mean? Who is the girl? And why is she connected to me?" Elizabeth took a deep breath, looking around the room as if trying to gather her thoughts. Her name was Lily. She lived here decades ago, but she didn't die naturally. She died in a way that left her spirit lingering. But what's worse, her death was connected to you. Maggie's eyes widened. "What do you mean? I don't know anyone named Lily. How could she be connected to me?" Elizabeth's voice grew softer. "I think you've forgotten, Maggie. I think you've been running from something terrible." Maggie's mind reeled. She had no memory of a Lily, no memory of any tragedy tied to her. But the more Elizabeth spoke, the more the house seemed to close in on her, pressing against her thoughts. "This house is a trap," Elizabeth continued, "and you're the key to unlocking it." Suddenly, the lights flickered. The air in the room grew heavier, colder. The shadows seemed to stretch and twist around them, as though the house itself was alive and reacting to their conversation. Maggie shivered, a wave of dizziness washing over her. "What's happening?" she gasped, gripping the edge of the couch for support. David stood up, looking around nervously. "This is ridiculous. Elizabeth, what's going on?" Elizabeth didn't answer immediately. She closed her eyes, her hand resting on the tarot cards. When she spoke again, her voice was almost a whisper. "The house is awakening. It's drawing power from you, Maggie. You're connected to it in ways you don't understand." Maggie's heart raced. "How do I break the connection? How do I stop this?" Elizabeth's expression darkened. "You need to remember, Maggie. You need to remember what happened. Only then can you break free." But before she could explain further, a loud bang echoed from the attic above. The house seemed to shudder, as though something had been disturbed. Maggie's blood ran cold. David grabbed her arm. "We need to get out of here," he urged, panic rising in his voice. "This is getting dangerous." Elizabeth shook her head. "You can't leave yet. The house won't let you." Maggie looked up at the ceiling, her pulse hammering in her ears. The noise was growing louder, like footsteps above them, coming closer. And then, through the silence, a faint voice whispered from the attic, chilling and distant. "Maggie." Her heart stopped. It was the same voice she'd heard in her memory. The girl, the one she'd never known, but who seemed to know her. "Maggie?" The voice repeated, louder this time. With a gasp, Maggie bolted from the couch, running toward the stairs. David tried to stop her, but she pushed him away, her mind consumed by the need to find the source of that voice. As she reached the staircase, Elizabeth grabbed her arm with surprising strength. "You don't know what you're walking into," Elizabeth warned. But Maggie yanked free, determined to face whatever awaited her in the attic. She took the stairs 2 at a time, her breath ragged, her thoughts spinning. At the top of the stairs, she paused, staring at the door to the attic. It was slightly ajar, as if inviting her in. Slowly, she pushed it open, the creaking sound echoing through the house. What she saw inside was not what she expected. The attic was empty, except for a single old photograph, lying face up on the floor. She picked it up, her hands trembling. It was a photo of a young girl, smiling brightly. The girl's name was written on the back, Lily. And there, standing beside her, was Maggie. Maggie stared at the photograph, her hands trembling. The girl in the image, Lily, looked so familiar, yet impossibly distant. But it was the other figure in the picture that left her breathless. A younger version of herself, standing right next to Lily, smiling as if they were best friends. "This can't be," Maggie whispered, her voice cracking. "I've never seen her before. How could this be me?" Footsteps creaked behind her, and she turned to see David and Elizabeth standing in the doorway. David's face was a mix of worry and disbelief, while Elizabeth's expression was one of grim understanding. Elizabeth stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "It's time to stop running, Maggie. You've been suppressing this memory for years, but the house, it won't let you forget anymore." "What memory?" Maggie cried, her voice rising. "I don't remember this. I don't know her." Elizabeth hesitated, then reached out, placing a hand on Maggie's shoulder. "You and Lily grew up here. You were childhood friends. But something terrible happened, something you've blocked out. The house has been holding that memory, waiting for you to return." David interjected, shaking his head. "This is insane. Maggie, you've told me everything about your childhood. You've never mentioned this house or anyone named Lily." Maggie clutched the photograph tightly, her mind spinning. She couldn't remember, but flashes of images began to surface, playing in the yard with a girl, running through the hallways of the house, and something dark, something terrible. Suddenly, the room grew colder, and the faint whispering voice returned. "Maggie." Maggie froze, her heart pounding. The voice wasn't coming from the attic anymore. It was right there in the room with them. Elizabeth closed her eyes, her face tense with concentration. "She's here," she said softly. "Lily's spirit is trying to reach out. She needs you to remember." Maggie felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. The edges of her vision blurred, and she dropped to her knees, clutching her head as fragmented memories surged forward. She saw herself and Lily, laughing as they played hide-and-seek in the attic. Then, the image shifted. Lily was crying, her face pale with fear, as an argument erupted between her parents downstairs. The house shook with anger, the air heavy with tension. And then it happened. Maggie saw herself as a child, hiding in the closet while Lily stood by the window. There was a loud crash, a shelf collapsing, and then silence. When Maggie peeked out, she saw Lily on the floor, unmoving. "No," Maggie gasped, tears streaming down her face. No, it wasn't my fault. I didn't mean to. I didn't know what to do. Elizabeth knelt beside her. You were just a child, Maggie. But Lily's spirit has been trapped here, waiting for you to come back. She's been trying to reach you, to help you set her free. Maggie looked up, her face wet with tears. How? How do I help her? Elizabeth glanced at the photograph in Maggie's hands. The connection is in the photograph. It's a tether holding her here. You need to let it go, to release her. David stepped forward, hesitant. Maggie, are you sure about this? What if this doesn't work? Maggie shook her head. I don't know, but I have to try. With trembling hands, she held the photograph up to the faint moonlight streaming through the attic window. Lily, she said softly, her voice breaking. I'm so sorry. I should have done something. I should have told someone, but I was scared. I was just a kid. Please forgive me. The air in the room seemed to shift, the oppressive weight lifting slightly. A soft, warm light began to emanate from the photograph, growing brighter and brighter until it filled the attic. Maggie felt a warmth on her skin, a sense of peace washing over her. And then a voice, gentle and clear, whispered in her ear, Thank you, Maggie. I forgive you. The light faded, and the photograph in Maggie's hands dissolved into dust. The attic grew quiet, the cold air replaced with a sense of calm. Elizabeth stood and helped Maggie to her feet. It's done, she said softly. She's free now. David wrapped his arms around Maggie, holding her as she cried. It's over, he whispered. It's finally over. As they left the attic, Maggie felt a strange sense of closure. The house, once heavy with fear and grief, now felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted. In the days that followed, Maggie and David decided to sell the house and move on. They knew they couldn't stay, but Maggie no longer feared the memories that had haunted her. For the first time in years, she felt free, and somewhere, she hoped, so did Lily.